Hello, and welcome to Locutors of Trek Supplemental, the podcast where we talk about the people, places, and things of Star Trek. So, grab yourself a Sumerian sunset or your Syntha selection of choice, and join us far beyond the stars.
Locutors of Trek.
Program initiated. Enter when ready.
Well, hi. It's me, Dave.
And I'm Davin.
We are Plain Simple Tailors and also the Locutors of Trek. We go by many names. Now, this is a bit of a shorter take, but the plan for this outing...
This supplemental, if you will.
Thank you for that addition. And there was a light golf clap all around. Anyway, so we're planning to talk about one of our great favorites in this part of the world, Labar's native son, our very own Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Or as, perhaps I should say, Admiral Jean-Luc Picard.
Or Johnny.
Mon Capitaine.
Or JL.
That's true. JL, he's gone by lots of things. So, our plan today is to take a look at the, well, as we talked about earlier, the rise, fall, death, and resurrection of Admiral, Captain, Mon Capitaine, Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah, as you admitted in a previous episode in one of our lists, your favorite character
He's
in
my
all
captain.
of Star Trek. So I thought we could maybe start off with, what is your favorite thing about Jean-Luc Picard?
Oh, goodness me.
Not to put you on the spot right off the start.
Probably my very favorite thing about Jean-Luc Picard is his sense of gravitas. You know, that sense of the depth of the present moment that he seems to carry about with him, you know, and I think in many ways that's inflected by, you know, the man of letters that we learn that he is, and also the archaeologist that we learn that he is. You know, I think in some sense his interest in the past, not only of Earth, but of many worlds, informs his sense of how decisive the present moment is. And you can see that over and over again in the way his character is present to the moment with sort of everything that he is.
So I suppose we should discuss the rise of Jean-Luc Picard.
Sure. So, for the facts of the matter, the sort of tail of the tape, as it were, Jean-Luc Picard was born July 13th, 2305, in La Barre, in France, on Earth. His mother was Yvette Gessard, and his father, I'm not sure if we ever learned his father's name.
Something...
Was it Robert as well?
I think it was Robert.
Okay, because his brother certainly is Robert.
I do believe it was Robert.
And Marie, his sister-in-law, Renee, his nephew, and he had an aunt, Adele, and a grandmother, I believe. Oh, no, his maman is who he sees in the episode with the Traveler. That's right. It's his mother, who clearly lived to quite an advanced age, as we see her as an elderly French lady. But yeah, he came from a family of...
Long enough to disapprove of him joining Starfleet.
Certainly, as we know his from the episode Brothers, his father disapproved of Starfleet.
As did his brother.
Deeply, as did his brother following his father.
Roberts don't like Starfleet.
That's why you don't see many Lieutenant Bobs.
Just Hutch. Call me Hutch.
Just Hutch. But yeah, they came from a family of vintners. They'd been making wine in France for who knows how long.
You get the impression it goes back a few generations, though.
It seems so.
Very old, well, even in the Picard series, very old architecture in that like main manor that they live in.
Yeah, and you know that's a different part of the property, I suspect, than where Robert was living. Now, I don't know whether
we see that
because we see that home in the episode Brothers, but that of course had burned down in a fire, which we learn in First Contact.
Yeah, I wonder if they would have. Yeah, so interesting.
So either
they must have had this old building on the property, or
this is interesting, right? Because it may be possible that French inheritance law was still operative in Picard's day, which would mean that... So current French inheritance law means that it's set up on Napoleonic principles such that From what I understand, the children all inherit a segment. At least all the male children do. The widow legally is not in a very favorable category
So
unless
Picard
something's
had
already
this
willed.
manor, and
So I
Robert
wonder
had the-
if these wouldn't have been homes they may have had built on the family property or that were already pre-existent, that they decided, well, Jean-Luc can maybe stay in the guest house if he comes by, but
That makes a
it
lot
hasn't
of
been open
sense.
for years. It may be something that
like he'd
Jean-Luc
want
opened
to
up
be
after he
polite to
came
stay
home.
with them in their house, right?
Sure.
And they probably weren't taking care of his place.
Yeah, how often had he ever been there? He'd
Yeah.
been away for 25 years, I think, or something, hadn't he? He'd been away for an enormously long time without really ever coming home for a long stretch.
And as you see in Brothers, Robert basically lives in the grape fields. He lives in with the vines. Like
Pretty much.
that house is just sitting in the grape fields. I mean, so is the other one because he just looks out off his balcony.
Yeah.
But those just seem to be a bit newer.
Well, and if
Like,
you...
those
if-
look like fresh fields, whereas those other ones were more like established vines.
And it's interesting. That's the way French fields are very often set up. If you drive through the French countryside, particularly in the north, and maybe not as much in the south, I'm not sure, but in the north you find these huge tracts of farmland and these small villages where many of the farmhouses are actually circumscribed by a wall, brick walls even now. But that pattern of architecture has persisted for an awfully long time. So I wonder if, this might not be a replanting or a planting after the fire. This may be, or maybe it's Jean-Luc's part of the vineyard, and that's what he's actually taking care of. You never know. Although we see a lot of robot cultivation and automated care being taken of the vineyard itself, he seems to also take a personal hand in it.
Him, 2 Romulans, and robots, it seems like.
And don't forget
Number one.
that beautiful, beautiful dog. Oh, man. I'm a sucker for dogs.
Such a
Let's
good
just...
boy.
He is such a good boy. I think I literally said that the first time I saw him on screen. It's like, oh, that's a good boy.
So you're good. Good successor to Porthos as the Star Trek dog.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Porthos, the cheese lover.
Also a good boy.
Yes, very good boy. And probably a more appropriate size of dog for a starship, let's be honest.
I agree. And more nimble.
Yeah. So, moving on from, French inheritance law of the 20th century.
And vineyards.
Young Jean-Luc makes his way through school and through much of his early life working to excel academically and athletically because he loves spaceships and Starfleet. And, I
didn't want to be another one in the line of vintners.
Precisely. I think he probably recognized fairly early on that Robert was going to take that on pretty handily. But his father was not happy about that.
No.
And it caused problems between them.
Takes 2 Picards to run a vineyard.
Right.
That sounded more Italian, didn't it? That was a terrible impression.
Southern France, pretty close to Italy. But anyway,
Yeah,
French people
there we
everywhere
go.
begin to crack their knuckles. But anyway, the sense is that he knew that his path to Starfleet would not be through, family connections or the support of his most intimate support network. So he needed to sort of get there on his own.
Which I guess maybe could be the beginning of his sort of reserved, hard kind of nature to...
Well, his sense of
Hard to get to know.
self-discipline.
Yeah.
That's always got a plan in mind. He's always got somewhere he's going, Even though he's got fire in him, we see that in the depictions of him in the academy, both in his memories as he is experiencing cardiac problems on a couple of occasions, and in his confused time traveling in All Good
Tapestry.
Things.
In
Tapestry, yep. And the sense of his academy days was really finding, I think, his own freedom as a person.
A
You know,
bit
he
too
got to
cocky,
be-
as he'd even say.
I think he experienced success in the academy. Boothby talks about a young man.
Oh,
that he
my
saw-
spirit animal.
Yeah. Running up a hill and doing the darndest athletic expression he'd ever seen, right, in this marathon. So, yeah, he gets pretty cocky and then eventually
Stabbed by an Ossican.
winds up requiring an artificial heart to pay the price for his early cockiness, as we learn in one of those great episodes where he and Wesley just get to have conversations. Season 2 episode.
Is that the one where he ends up injured as well?
He has to go get a replacement heart.
Oh yeah, that one.
Because his prosthetic
That's where we find
failing.
out he doesn't have a real heart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we prove that his heart is actually deep and articulate and nuanced at the same time, right? Which is lovely. I love the play in that episode that he literally doesn't have an actual heart.
No.
But he's so deep.
It's true.
He and Wesley have this very interesting encounter where Wesley is trying to push him about children.
Just
And that he would have made a good father, right? He's trying to make this paternal connection with Picard, who, kids know things that their parents don't necessarily want them to pick up on. Mm-hmm. And I'm absolutely sure that Wesley, from the very first episode, knew, the way his mom's breath catches in the turbo lift as he's about to step on the bridge, that there's something going on there between her and that guy that brought Dad's body home. There's just some... whatever it is, there's some vibrational wavelength they're on that he as her kid just is sort of aware of but may not understand, But it puts him in this paternal mode toward Picard from very early on.
Yeah.
And Picard is very uncomfortable with that.
What is this boy doing on my bridge?
Oh, he's such a jerk in those first 2 episodes.
Man, yes.
The way he welcomes Riker onto the ship as well is... fascinating.
He seemed a little uncomfortable being the captain of the flagship in those early episodes. He was almost trying too hard.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's his first command since the Stargazer, right?
And the way he talks about himself on the Stargazer seems to be quite a different person.
He lost a home. He lost his home there, So I think, it probably stands to reason to talk a little bit about the Stargazer for a minute. Mm-hmm. So Picard graduates the academy. He has a cadet cruise and ends up very quickly, I think, on the Stargazer by at least... He's there by 2333, so he would be 28.
Class, but it's the same class as the Hathaway from the TNG episode.
Stargazer's a constellation class.
Is that what it is? A constellation.
Yeah. So a classic sort of turn of the century kind of class. So the Stargazer would have been 25, 30, 35 years old, probably through its first, heading for its second refit by the time that a young Jean-Luc Picard as an ensign would have come aboard. And he ends up getting assigned as helmsman, which means he's somewhere probably between ensign and lieutenant junior grade, or maybe lieutenant.
And a good helmsman, from what we understand, and he shows that off later in some TNG episodes.
Precisely.
With the asteroid field.
That was a great...
With the joystick.
Oh, that's a great episode.
Driving the Enterprise with the joystick.
Yeah. That was what... I remember watching that as a kid on TV, and I was just like... I was holding my breath the whole time they were going through that asteroid field. It was awesome.
It was like the Jaws music.
Oh, it was great.
The asteroid is the shark.
That was good suspense. When you still had to wait a week for the new episode every week. We just dated ourselves again. Anyway.
Or a season to see if Picard's still aboard.
That's true. Just wait for the whole summer. Don't worry about it. Oh, man. Yeah.
He's probably fine.
We probably didn't just blow him up. It'll be okay.
I mean, we're still in contract negotiations, but I'm sure he's fine.
But, so in 2333, during an engagement, the command crew on the bridge of the Stargazer were casualties. And a young Jean-Luc Picard jumped into the command seat and got the ship out of harm's way and to safety. This resulted in him being one of the youngest officers in Starfleet to ever be given command of a vessel. Now, this is an interesting point. It may sound, first of all, like it says that Jean-Luc Picard is the youngest person to ever become a Starfleet captain. And while, yes, that's true, it's not likely that he attained the rank of captain. There's an old naval tradition, which certainly was true from the British Navy
Battlefield promotion.
Of battlefield promotion, but also that anyone in command of a ship, independent of their actual naval rank, is still called captain because they're the captain of the darn boat.
Oh, like when Nog says the chief, so if everybody else died, I would be called captain?
Exactly.
He's like, yes, Nog, but there'll be no one left to call you it.
It's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory. Exactly. So
This is Captain Nog alone on the Defiant.
look out. So this is how Picard got command of the Stargazer, and he remained in command of that vessel for the next 22 years.
Was it 22 years?
22 years till.
Wow. That's got to be a long tenure on any ship.
I mean,
for
it's a
any
long
captain.
time, right? And he's in command the whole time, rising from, one assumes, lieutenant commander to captain, right?
All the
he got a
adventures they
promotion to
must have had
commander
in
very
those
quickly.
22 years on the Stargazer.
Right?
Hmm.
This was a scientific research and patrol vessel, much like others. It had a lot of shuttle bays, so it had a number of mission profiles it could have performed. And I think it was also involved in some of the Cardassian border wars, if you recall correctly, or if I remember rightly, anyway. And then in 2355, it's the Battle of Maxia.
Oh, right, the Battle of Maxia.
Yeah, where a single Ferengi ship sneaks up on the Stargazer, launches a deadly salvo, mortally wounding the vessel.
And our hero, Jean-Luc Picard, murders the son of Damon Bach in cold blood.
As Damon Bach would have said, yes. And in fact does try to say.
Damn you, Picard.
Picard loses the ship but saves the vast majority of the crew. And they're in space, I think in shuttlecraft and escape pods for something like 7 weeks before a Federation science ship picks up a faint signal and rescues them. Now after this,
That is what they taught us on Ferenginar.
well, it's from their perspective, I'm sure it's a quite correct account, at least according to their interests. So Picard is court-martialed
Interest? How much?
by an old friend of his, who we meet in the season 2 episode Measure of a Man.
Measure of a Man. One of my favorites.
Oh, wonderful episode. And that continues.
Good Riker episode as well, and good Data episode.
Indeed. And so the legal advocate there, the JAG officer, Philippa is the officer who had been his prosecutor during the court-martial
Because he was court-martialed, that's right.
after the loss of the Stargazer.
And she came at him pretty hard, as he says.
She did.
Just doing her job.
And it seems as though this led to some kind of period of inactivity in Starfleet for Picard.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a period between 2355.
But he wasn't court-martialed.
Well, he wasn't let go from Starfleet as far as we know. But the gap in years between 2355 and 2364, when Picard takes command of the Enterprise, remains as a relative blank, save in some novels and other things which have explored this in sort of non-televised, non-filmic treatments. I would love to see some flashback material, Paging Picard season 2.
Of the Stargazer stuff. That would be great.
Stargazer, or even those years in between.
Or the years in between.
The sense of those years adrift from Starfleet or from his duties as an officer would be very, very interesting.
Yeah. Be some interesting characters there we've never met, too.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
And Guinan.
We
do
that
know
may be
Guinan's
where-
going to be in season 2 or so.
That may be where they got to know each other. We don't know.
And
Again.
in Measure of a
For the
Man,
first time.
but speaking of the Picard series as well, Measure of the Man is kind of the first episode that really starts to develop the relationship between Picard and Data on more of a deeper level, where he chooses him as his advocate. Well, no, I guess he's forced to be his advocate as the captain, but
I think
he
Picard's-
really appreciated in the
Yeah.
just the words he was speaking. He said a lot of nice things about Data's existence and.
Well, and that he cut to the ethical point, which was the creation of manufactured slave race.
That and how they're out to seek new life, and there it is. He's like, there it sits. He's like, we're out here seeking new life, and now we're here in court to see if we can just take it apart. He always had this kind of golden ideal of what Starfleet was.
Absolutely. Yeah, he understood the logic of Starfleet's existence and lived very directly by that logic. And I think found it confusing sometimes, challenging, baffling, and sometimes, frankly, appalling when Starfleet or other Starfleet officers didn't seem to share that understanding of what Starfleet was and what it was about. You know, his sense of what Starfleet is different than, say, Ben Sisko's shorthand, which he calls the uniform. You know, you betrayed the uniform, he'll say to Eddington. Whereas
Picard will say Starfleet.
Picard talks about Starfleet
Or the
as a
Federation
kind of
sometimes.
reality that is a real sort of embodied ideal for him. You know, it's embodied in every Starfleet officer, and they need to be living into that reality, just as he does. That's what he expects on his ship.
You know, as we said in the Academy years and even his early years on the Stargazer, and probably going forward on the Stargazer, we don't know. He was always someone who was a high achiever and tried really hard, and it wasn't just a fluke. Like, Picard tries hard, as we see in a lot of episodes.
Yeah, he has a deep
Like his
sincerity
will
to
and
his
his
belief.
determination and dedication. Like, he doesn't spend a lot of time on the holodeck or anything. It's just the job, you know. He tries hard.
He does like a good Dixon Hill story from time
He
to time,
likes
and a little bit of
Hill
Shakespeare.
story, a little bit of Shakespeare.
But,
That's true. That's true.
That, again, he'll remark that it's an infrequent pleasure. You know?
He doesn't hang out in 10 Forward.
Not very often.
Not often we see him in down
He
in
goes
10
to 10 Forward generally to see Guinan.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even tend to fraternize with the crew all that much. Right? It takes him being possessed by an alien to join the crew's poker game. You know? So it's a...
Dude,
he
love that
leads in
scene.
some ways a very lonely existence, but also a sort of singularly driven existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it stands out that the relationships like Galen or Guinan or Vosh and some others that he does form over the series, those really stick out as peculiar associations he's made.
Well, and that makes sense for why Galen felt so betrayed by Jean-Luc, because Jean-Luc, as he does, he embraces the moment. He would have just been all in. He would have been so all in on this archaeology, where Galen was just like, this is it. Who could be more all in than this kid? You know?
Yeah. I think he noticed the same thing that many others noticed in Picard, which was that he had a special kind of determination, but that means that wherever he chose to apply that, he's also choosing the entire rest of existence to not apply it there, you know? And I wonder if a young Jean-Luc wasn't aware of that kind of a pressure and thought, you know, I've got to stay laser focused on Starfleet, or I'll just lose it. I'll just end up sort of anywhere, and I won't be on a spaceship. And honestly, if spaceship is dangled in front of you as the prospect of what you get to do, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Spaceship.
Well, as he said to Galen, he's like, I can't just leave the Enterprise and come back. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And I can't leave the Enterprise. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Like, he even tells Beverly, she's just like, oh, you're worried or you have regret. You can't go with him? And he's just like, well, no, not really.
Now, speaking of relationships, that is one of the relationships I found most rewarding to watch on TNG. They really seem to have, like, their relationship grows and deepens in ways that always have that, like, they both know they'll never not be attracted to each other. They know that there's sexual tension there.
That existed before she was married to his best friend.
Exactly. And from what, season 1, episode 4, which I think is the drunken virus carbon sugar chain episode.
Oh, yeah.
With the wonderful scene where he's like, Beverly. Oh my gosh. That is just a brilliant comedic moment. But yeah, they recognize this about each other, and it's one of the things that keeps them, in a certain sense, coming back to each other, but also the fact that they just really deeply enjoy each other as human beings on levels that aren't unrelated to, but they're not determined by that erotic level. You know, they enjoy their breakfasts, they enjoy conversation together, they enjoy all of those things that you build a real solid friendship out of, that they decide not to explore that while they're on the same ship together, I think testifies to the fact that they're both committed Starfleet officers, but also that they're just real grown-ups.
Yeah.
And they kind of meet each other in really grown-up ways.
Yeah. They sort of have this barrier they put up between each other, which ends up, like, confusing breakfast even, because they can't even tell each other that they don't like the same kind of breakfast.
Oh, that's a great moment.
She'd rather just have coffee and croissant, right? He's like, yeah, that would be much better than Andorian spice cake or whatever we're eating right now.
I just want my
I
croissant.
just want coffee, and I mean that's a croissant more than Janeway would have for breakfast.
That's true. Just coffee.
Just coffee.
Just coffee.
Maybe some vegetable bouillon if
I'm
I'm
sure
hungry.
Neelix just snuck protein into her coffee at various
Something.
points.
He was
Keep
definitely
the woman
slipping
walking
something.
and standing.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting question for me. Where would you date the beginning of the fall of Jean-Luc Picard?
Locutus of Borg.
Okay, I'm glad we're agreed.
Yeah.
I was going to say Wolf 359 is for me where that, or
I would say the
Whatever,
moment
the
he was
nebula-
assimilated. The moment he was
Yeah.
assimilated.
yeah,
And he loses. It's the first time Jean-Luc Picard doesn't have full control over Jean-Luc Picard.
yeah.
And of all the people we've seen in Star Trek, he likes that the least. Because a lot of people
yeah.
get mind controlled and possessed by different things in Star Trek and kind of just move on. But not Jean-Luc Picard.
That messes
He-
with him unbelievably.
He just feels like he fails himself, he fails his crew, he fails the Starfleet, he fails humanity. He just takes it on every level.
Well, and I think his refined,
I mean, he did a lot of damage, to be fair.
Sure. 11,000 officers in less than an hour, right?
For someone who loves Starfleet so much, like,
That's brutal. That's just brutal, right? 39 of the best ships they had. Yeah, I mean the sight of him lying
Jennifer
in
Sisko.
the mud. Jennifer Sisko, exactly, and the Kyushu.
the
NCC
Kyushu.
6
The gorgeous
5491. Oh my baby. She's a fine ship.
She's not fine. She was.
Was a fine was a fine ship. Little bit worse for wear now.
/ will be in the future, hopefully.
Well, one hopes. Paramount, call me.
The year 2374, call me.
That's right. So, yeah, the sight of him covered in mud, having just beaten himself and his brother to a pulp in a vineyard,
Great scene.
crying,
Great
they
episode.
took everything from me. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't do it. You know, his sense of that violation on a juridical, military, personal, political, essential level, you know,
And I
is-
couldn't stop them.
He couldn't stop
Yeah,
them.
that's what he said. I couldn't stop them. He's like,
Just
I wasn't strong enough. He's
completely
like, I've done
overpowered.
all this time. I was always the best. Always made sure I was the best.
I couldn't.
And I couldn't stop them.
He was just thoroughly.
He just felt like
Thoroughly
everything he ever worked for was like meaningless almost. He's just like, I was training this whole time to not ever have anything like that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, the catastrophe had come upon him at that moment. And it revealed in one sense how tiny he was in comparison to this collective, right? There's an ancient and early medieval term that was used for this. There's this great Syrian ancient philosopher named Iamblichus who talks about the oudeneia of the mortal being in the face of the gods, Zeus or Mars or Athena or something like that, in a book called On the Mysteries of the Chaldeans and the Egyptians. And that oudeneia means the relative nothingness, right? And I think Picard really experiences that annihilation, but also that comparative nothingness of the self to the collective.
What he really expresses to Robert and what Deanna was feeling the whole time and trying to get across to him
Yeah.
was that it's going to be a long process.
And, you know, and his experience during Chain of Command, I think, was another moment in which
Another
his
just
self was
amazing
cracked
episode.
wide open, right? And those
But that's the
experiences-
What we see, what he shows, is that in that instance he was strong enough. But what he admits to Deanna is that he
Yes.
actually wasn't.
Yeah.
So again, he experiences the same thing. He wasn't strong enough. 10 more minutes, and he wouldn't have been strong enough.
Yeah. And, you know, there's another moment that overpowers him in a beautiful way that I think is also equally significant. You know, the Resican probe that forces him to live an entire other lifetime
Certainly
from early adulthood until death.
Certainly my favorite kind of probe.
More pleasant than all the other alien ones we often talk about in pop culture. But, that sense really struck me with the line in the first episode of season 1 of Picard where Daj asks Jean-Luc, have you ever been a stranger to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Many, many times, he says. The depth
Those
of
are two of the times. It's like
those are
the one you immediately think of is Wolf 359, but
Mm-hmm.
in Chain of Command, that was another one of those times.
And-
Picard
and-
doesn't recognize himself when he's
No.
to the point of not being resolute and in control and
Absolutely.
the man, essentially, like the gravitas that you discussed earlier. Like,
Absolutely. He's reduced to the moment in Chain of Command instead of being present to it. He can't get out of it. And so all he can do is cling to the moment there, It's a brilliant, brilliant pair of episodes. And, in some ways, one of the ethical heights of TNG as a series.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the other places that we see, to my mind, the beginning of Picard's fall from or...
now there's his fall as he sees himself, but there's also his fall within Starfleet and
That's
their
just what I was
opinion of
thinking
him.
about.
Yeah.
Some of his actions, with Spock on Romulus and some others, can't have sat well with Starfleet Command because he pushes in a number of places. Plus, when he just blew up that plot of weird aliens that climb inside your neck and put a gill out the back of it in season 1, where he was firing phasers at people inside Starfleet Command. That's not a small... He and Riker blew a guy's head up inside
They stormed
Starfleet
Starfleet Command, yeah.
That's, it's not small. So I think this pretty neatly brings us to a more focused discussion of the first season of the new Star Trek Picard.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it really developed his character well and gave us a lot of beautiful moments with a lot of the old crew.
Oh, and
Just the beginning of the series itself, blue skies.
Blue skies smiling at me.
Nothing
Oh,
but blue
man.
skies. Do I see?
Oh, I'm not sure I have been moved to weep openly in the first 2 seconds of a television program ever.
It made me pretty happy.
But, that moment where he looks up and he says, I don't want the game to end. I just stab me in the heart. This is brilliant.
Yeah, it's true. You're worried because sequels aren't always the best thing. And I had a little nervousness going in. And that opening scene sort of just relaxed.
In
my
many ways,
soul
very
a little
reassuring.
bit. Yeah.
And then that explosion, kaboom! And in a certain way, that was how Picard felt to me in many ways. I thought it was in many ways a brilliant take on a world which had moved on since the late 1980s had attempted to depict the 24th century. That speech that Picard gives in the first episode, where it says, "You have become a stranger to history," was just so beautiful.
Is that when he's with the not when he's
With the reporter.
Oh, I
Yeah.
loved that scene.
That he has a sense that people of his age, having survived, the Dominion, the Klingon Wars, the Romulan Wars, the Cardassian Wars, having survived all of this stuff, even repelled the Borg, had become, in a certain sense, mollified by the end of history. And in many ways, it really recalled me to
Starfleet became more political.
Yeah,
In not the good way.
sure.
More about kind of the petty end of politics. Keeping certain people happy at the cost of the Romulans.
Yeah. And I think, if...
Like
had it-
6 worlds leaving something as big as the Federation.
Yeah.
Not a big threat, you wouldn't think. You could see why Jean-Luc Picard wouldn't understand that decision. So
Yeah.
6 worlds are going to leave if we,
It's like, we
don't
do-
let the Romulans die as a species. Yes.
So we do a couple of decades of good diplomacy and we woo them back.
Yeah, or a couple
know?
years.
Yeah,
they're-
right?
They'll miss the Federation.
Yeah.
It's root beer.
It's root beer.
It's insidious and sweet.
But yeah, the wound which the Federation and Picard suffered at Wolf 359 is like a kind of foreshadowing of the wound they suffer on Mars. in a strange way, that it shatters Picard, it shatters his career, it shatters his ideals, and it shatters the Federation's own sense of itself, right? When he's making that speech about the loss of history or the loss of a real historical perspective, he's talking to people who have grown up at once first accepting this android race that was doing all the dirty work, and then accepting shutting them all down and letting
outlawing
a
them
species...
as a species.
Exactly.
We determine in measure of a man, they're a species, potentially.
Right? And where did that decision go in the meantime, right? It's not that we've never seen
Where's
good
Philippa?
policy get buried under, political interest before. There's lots of arguments about happening right now around really important issues. But the sense that, as he says, Starfleet decided to slink away.
It was no
Instead
longer
of,
Starfleet.
Fulfilling its real duty to infinitely diverse life in infinite combinations. There's this parting from its foundational ideals.
You mean Romulan lives? No.
I mean lives.
Lives.
Yeah.
Which shouldn't have been surprising, you wouldn't think, to somebody in that future, as we have kind of come to know that future.
Yeah, and it exposes a sort of a difficult underbelly in that future where propaganda and this sort of normalization of cultural values can be slid in all sorts of directions given the right circumstances, right? And that seems to be definitely what's happened in the Federation of 2399 when we sort of catch up with Jean-Luc Picard. The other side I think we see in Picard is a much more civilian Federation. And we've never really seen that at all, except for drab brown and olive green dressed settlers on random planets. We've not seen an awful lot of civilian life in Star Trek before.
At least not Picard dealing with civilian life.
Awkward.
Awkward.
He's not.
Where's your uniform?
He's not very skilled as that.
I don't have a uniform. I'm a civilian.
Yeah, the series is wonderful in the sense that, the first 5 episodes really are this progressive dismantling of the historical Picard, the present Picard, the Picard we didn't see in the middle years, where by the introduction of Raffi, who has just got to be one of my favorite new characters.
I love Raffi.
Gosh, Raffi's great.
Yeah. Agreed.
She's busted up, but she's just amazing.
Definitely my favorite new character on that show.
And and there's a bunch of good ones.
There are
that have shown up.
There's Agnes.
Oh, Agnes Drock is just a delight. Chris Rios is. I really enjoy him.
The many personalities.
The many faces of Rios. His ability to do accents, I think, was wonderfully
great actor. He's
displayed in that season. And I hope those holograms don't go away. I love the cranky Spanish swearing Gunner hologram. He was maybe my favorite of them all.
He's pretty good.
He seems very close to many elements of Rios, and that you see a lot of in the series. But
that's just Rios.
Yeah, it's just pretty much him. The sort of abjection of Picard in those first 5 episodes, where he's shown to be sort of mistaken and a little bit doddering and has lost his way and all those sort of things.
Like everyone's constantly insulting him.
Oh my
Even
God.
the people he loves, like the I can't remember her name, the Romulan lady who lives on it.
Yes. I've lost it.
She's constantly just telling him like what a lazy loser he is, basically.
Oh, they're delightful.
But at the same time, they also say to him, like before he goes out to do that interview, he's just like, remember who you are. Like, we don't forget.
Yeah.
It's funny that Earth and Starfleet, they've forgotten who Jean-Luc Picard is as we know him through the things that we've seen, but the Romulans haven't. No, now it's the Romulans who share sort of our view of Jean-Luc Picard.
And it's really interesting.
I love it. It's such a great twist.
They sort of put everything in a blender and spun it around,
Mm-hmm. I think it's just a beautiful way to go with his character. Because during the poker scene at the end of TNG, and well, then the movies, of course, which is kind of doesn't go too much further with his character. It makes you wonder where that character would go, Jean-Luc Picard. Like, he can't stay on the Enterprise but what would get him off the Enterprise? That moment, like, what gets him off the Enterprise?
Yeah.
Is it age? Is it what?
Because if it's nothing else, it would have ended up being age.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I don't think he would have ever relinquished command of a starship.
It would have been his, what was it? He gets the, some sort of senility as he gets older, as we see.
In All Good Things, we see that happening. And there is an abnormality in his, do they say his hypothalamus or his thalamus?
In Picard.
That the
kill
doctor notes in Picard that will kill him.
Was that his doctor on Stargazer? Because they seem to go way back.
That was his doctor on his chief medical officer on the Stargazer.
That's cool.
I liked that a lot. Because the Stargazer is just such an important period of his life. And
so they probably served together for 20 plus years, maybe.
Yeah. They've probably been in contact the entire time he's been on the Enterprise. They may well call each other and write letters, right? He may know things about Picard's medical history that Crusher doesn't know, right? Which is interesting.
22 years on a starship.
That's a long time to serve together, you know. And the uptick for me in the series is, I mean, the moment that I really sort of found that Picard had kind of grabbed me. I mean, other than, the sort of first few moments, and I thought, this is just beautiful. There's the Enterprise D again. Oh, my God. This is great.
It was a beautiful shot.
Right into 10 forward was the moment in Quarks where Elnor asks, are we still pretending? The sort of ludicrous quality of that scene was beautiful. And Picard, mimicking this really awful French accent.
Oh, that was amazing.
Just classic.
I am a bounty hunter.
Disgusting. Oh, man, it's just great. But, it really grabbed me that there was still, that sense of lightness was still in the character, that he could, even in the midst of this insane scheme they're running, he's really enjoying
the moment,
playing dress up, and he's just having an awful lot of fun being this terrible scoundrel, which we've seen him enjoy doing before, on the hunt for the Stone of Gaul, for instance, right? He really seemed to enjoy going undercover as...
You mean in the Gambit?
Yes.
He was Galen. He named himself
Indeed,
after his
he did
Professor
name himself
Galen. Because he was being an archaeologist. He's like, what else am I going to name an archaeologist? It's like, crap, I can only think of one archaeologist name. Galen. My name is Galen.
It did sound like you just said garcheologist right there.
Did I say garcheologist?
It makes me think about someone who studies like Gaurons. I'm a garcheologist. Glory to you and your house.
Garkin to you.
Garkin, bring me more drink. Now, there's a couple of things that... No, you go ahead.
No, you say episodes 1 to 5. Was it not episode 5 Nepenthe?
I thought that was episode 6.
Oh, well. Let's move on to episode 6.
Oh, beautiful.
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 Even more so than the data scenes with him. I loved that. Just Riker coming out like a big bear and just picking him up in a big hug.
Yeah. Oh, man. And one of my favorite episodes, we've had some trouble with Kazinti. Oh, man. That was maybe my favorite deep cut.
That was a deep cut.
Like right back to, what is it? Animated series.
Well, that's why he has the shields on his house. 2
or something with the slaver device.
Yeah.
Which is a classic animated episode. Yeah. And, a Larry Niven set of stories that I think technically would be placed somewhere just after or maybe even during the Romulan Earth War. Would have been the Kazinti Wars with the human and Kazinti. But yeah, what a beautiful episode.
Yeah.
I hope they return there.
I do too. It's got to be the best stuff they ever gave Marina Sirtis to work with. And she just owned it. She
was amazing. I love the scene with Daj where she seems to be alternating between rage.
Yeah, she seems so angry in that scene.
Empathy and this sort of fierceness that's not quite either one. Oh, man.
She's being, like, protective. She's being of Jean-Luc. She's being protective of this girl.
And also just...
Who she can't read, I don't think.
Yeah, full of rage about the Borg as well, right? Which is really interesting.
But he the scene where he just walks in and she just kind of tilts her head and she feels all his stuff right away and she's just like, what's wrong? Like, no, not even, she just hugs him and she's just like, she knows what's wrong. Like,
Yeah.
she's just like, ugh, you're not here under good circumstances. Ugh. Thanks for the unpleasant emotions.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's what I deal with.
Oh, that was such a beautiful episode.
You know, you gotta make
And
some...
again, you know, it answers one of those questions, you know, what would ever get Will Riker to
stop being a
stop being a
spaceman.
Starfleet officer? Like, he's a spaceman.
I
You're
guess
right.
the answer is children.
Yeah, his family and his family.
His
family
family.
would do it.
They
That family
they
he's
had
been
to go to
searching for
that
his whole
planet
life.
to keep the sun alive.
Yeah.
And they just stayed there afterward because it was their home.
Yeah.
But that was it. Like, had he not needed to be on that planet to live, they would have been living on the Titan.
Probably still on the Titan, yeah. 22 years of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we could go on about, and I think we should probably do a sort of more in-depth review of the first season of Picard at some point. But, you know,
Gonna mention one more moment from that episode, though.
All right.
Because I love it so much, and she doesn't get a lot of credit all the time, is Deanna, where she just says to him, I'm not as strong as I used to be, Jean-Luc. And he just doesn't believe her. Right? He's just like, no, you're wiser. She's just like, no, you're not going to just throw yourself into danger willy-nilly, but that's not weakness. That's wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Because he's there because he needs them, right?
Oh, he's just
desperate and he's on the
so
run.
in over his head at
and
that
she
point.
knows it right away. She's like, wow, like,
You're really in
just
trouble
like on the run here.
Yeah.
But they needed him as well. The thing that they always had in him was that just super wise
Yes.
person, right?
Yes.
And that's what she needed to hear. And
Yeah.
it took him to...
Well, and sometimes it takes somebody looking into the fishbowl from outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
To really say what's going on in the water. Now so I think this brings us to the death.
The death of Jean-Luc Picard.
Which
I like that it's from an illness. Mm-hmm. It was, to
And I
me,
like
more
that he pushes us.
satisfying than Kirk falling off a mountain on a piece of a gantry.
yes, and I like it that he does it his way in that he's pushing the diplomatic side of things to the very end. He's pushing the side of peace, the side of reconciliation, and he literally gives his life in that regard. Mm-hmm. And he's able to do it in a way that he had been avoiding and resentfully dismissing for 14 years. You know, and those 14 years have been really long for him, I think.
Yeah, he's just trying to tell every side. Just like, no, like, examine these voices of contention here. Like,
Yes.
Don't be looking at each other. Look into the source of all these
Yes.
contentious issues here.
And I like it that they lingered on the moment of his death for a while, you know? Because there have been some moments in Star Trek, you know.
Yeah, everyone mourns for him. You get all those scenes.
I mean, we in some ways it felt a bit like the end of Star Trek 2 into Star Trek 3 in some ways, right? Where we get this moment where people really do have it wash over them. They have lost their friend. He is gone.
Yeah, the movie Star Trek 3 starts, there's no Spock.
Yeah. And those scenes start without us knowing really whether he's going into that golem body. The suggestion is obviously there, but I do like that a lot. That, you know, he's going to get a while longer, but you know, not a hugely long time.
No.
He's going to age more like a human would age. You know, he might make it out to Dr. Leonard McCoy type ages,
but
or
as
something.
sort of this version of Data.
Yeah. They've kind of come
because
together.
Of Data, in a way, and the technology that made up Data. Like, it's almost, to him, I bet.
Data's finally really saved him.
Saved him again.
Yeah.
Again. Like he did in Nemesis. Like he...
Yeah. And, you know, and ultimately that really does treat, I think, Data's character beautifully, too, because I think that's the choice that Data would make every time.
Data's probably the most
time.
heroic character in all of Star Trek.
He's
Like,
just absolutely
could be
selfless.
Jean-Luc Picard, Worf, you know, there's a lot of heroic characters. Kira. Mm-hmm. But
I think Data is the one who can...
truly selfless.
yeah, he can really say, no, it's okay. It's okay that I'm gonna be destroyed.
He can just do that mathematical equation. Him sacrificing himself for Picard. One or the other, one for one. I have more value for you as my friend than I do for myself because I'm not selfish.
And I know it's consistent with my values as a Starfleet officer.
Yep, exactly. So, easy decision.
Yeah.
I'm not sad about this. You shouldn't be either. This was the way it should go.
This is good.
Yeah, this is good.
And that's just lovely.
Mm-hmm. And then in the end of the series, Picard gets to save Data in a way. As we see, he's stuck in this limbo that he's not enjoying.
He gets to give him what amounts to a good death.
Mm.
And...
Sad scene. Now talk about weeping. That's the one that got me.
Oh, God. That was hard. I was a pretty sniffly mess. But at the same time, I thought, there's not many, particularly science fiction shows, where we deal with death as anything but an evil, And there was something really beautiful in showing both Picard's death as noble and righteous and full of meaning, but also
and under
Data's.
his terms.
Yeah.
And same with Data's.
And I mean, it mirrors that statement in the first episode where he says, Data was all courage, all meaning, I loved that sensibility, and it really is accomplished in the end of that episode, that final episode.
And I got the feeling that Data started to believe that his end was going to come alone. And the fact that he did get to die with his friend at his side meant a lot to him. And it just,
I think so.
It was like almost joyful because it's not something he was expecting.
Yeah.
I think he was just expecting to blink out in that memory bank or wherever he was.
That it would just run out at some point. Yeah, I could see that. And if that's how it happened, then that's how it happened. But this is far better. Yeah. And I mean, what can any of us ask but to have our dear ones at our side as we're slipping out of this world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then resurrection.
Well, as we said, it's sort of a Data type version of Picard.
Yeah.
Probably won't get sick because he's an android, but it will eventually run out of power or shut
they
off.
say he'll eventually age out because he's got a kind of pretty fleshy body. But I love it that even in the end of that, as they're sort of finding themselves a little family, and Rafi and Seven are sort of finding their way toward each other, and there's all sorts of things happening that Soji and Picard can find a certain solidarity in that they're both now technically
robots, robots,
illegal people in the Federation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right, robots. Oh man.
Hey man, the inventor of the word says it's pronounced robot. We're all doing it wrong.
Listen, I'll follow Asimov. Yeah, Picard forever, man.
But it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward.
I would love. There's lots of folks I'm looking forward to.
Now it's like is he going to have weird issues? He's like, now am I a Borg? Am I like I'm part machine again? Is he going to have weird?
Yeah, I hope it doesn't
that?
just become a submerged sort of fait accompli in the next season. I really hope they do spend some time. And if Soji's still on La Sirena with them, I think they're going to have to. That's going to show up as a real issue. In some ways, I hope that there's a couple more sort of episodic episodes in the second season. I'd love to see them just sort of land on a weird planet or have an adventure.
Yeah.
But the tightness of the first season played well, and apart from recasting Bruce Maddox, which honestly, in context, I can totally understand why you would change the look of your face and the sound of your voice and just keep going under another appearance. Makes perfect sense. Like I don't want to call anybody out on that, but I would have loved to have seen them bring him back. And a couple of other things that I might criticize.
Yeah, I think the last episode was probably the least strong.
I think it was the most rushed, certainly.
Wasn't a huge fan of the CGI octopus.
No, I was a huge fan of the CGI flowers.
Me too.
Man, I love those.
Let's talk about those in our next episode, which is on biology.
Oh yeah, we have to. Those were one of the most Star Trek things I've ever seen.
Yeah, next episode
that
on
just
that
delighted me. Oh man, that delighted me no end.
Yeah. To
yeah.
be continued on those.
Yeah, to be continued on those.
Me and Dave love space flowers.
Oh, man. Space. Yeah, they were so great. But, I would have loved to see more ship classes in the Federation fleet that showed up.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
But, I mean, and
But these are small things.
There is a great YouTube clip online where somebody does that.
Oh, wow. Is there a Defiant?
Oh my God. There's a Defiant, there are Ambassador classes, there are Excelsiors, I think they just stole a bunch of footage from DS9 and put it over there.
Probably. So what's that Klingon ship doing there?
Good old Burrell.
It's great, doesn't it?
Everybody
yes.
loves Burrell.
Exactly.
But yeah, apart from that, I thought, those were more sort of execution things, I thought. Because story-wise...
Great character development.
Acting character-wise, I thought it was just beautiful. And shows that, even no matter how far the Federation has come, human problems still remain human problems. People get into hard places. We grieve. We lose stuff.
People lean on crutches, as we see with Raffi.
Exactly, right? We fall prey sometimes to the darker, harsher, sadder, more resentful elements in our nature. And sometimes we want revenge. And all of that is true of us, but...
Or redemption.
Exactly.
With Raffi. She just wants to be kind of forgiven by her son.
Absolutely, right? We want all of these sorts of things. Fundamental needs abide. To love and be loved, to relate to each other, to seek peace and seek fruition in our lives. And that Picard holds on to and sort of brings his crew back toward in the end as well. Rios is a bloody mess. Raffi's a mess.
I'm interested to see in season 2 why his ejection from Starfleet automatically meant hers.
Yeah. I would like to know that as well. Was she hanging on by a thread beforehand?
She's just like, well, you know what that means for me, right?
Yeah. And maybe that's just sort of the vindictive character that Starfleet had developed at that time.
Maybe.
In the wake of the Mars catastrophe, right?
We could probably revisit this on some other Captain Picard day.
Any other Tuesday, man.
Any final thoughts?
Well, it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved before. End transmission.